Welcome to All Cards on Deck. If you're new here, I'm Ola. I'm the host of these LinkedIn series where I sit down with different guests who are having absolutely different backgrounds. They live in absolutely different places and countries, but they all have something in common. They all live their lives purposefully, filled with purpose. And I created All Cards on Deck to share stories of those who are a few steps ahead with all their ups, with all their challenges, with all their downs, for you to learn from our mistakes, not to do the same ones, for your journey to be smoother, and also, of course, for you to get inspired to take action. Because if you're sitting there hating your life, hating what you do, and the only thing that you do is complain, nothing's going to change. Things will change only when you start taking action. And again, this is the biggest intention with all cards on deck is for you to start taking action, at least, small steps, one step at a time. And also, All Cards on Deck has a little twist at the end. We actually play a card game. I mean, it's called All Cards on Deck for a reason. The card game is called We Are Not Really Strangers. And on each card, there are random personal questions. So at the end, I draw three cards. Some questions are funny, some questions are weird, but yeah, this is how we're getting to know our guests from a different angle, beyond purpose and beyond what they do. And today we have yet another incredible guest. His name is Aleksander Brankov. He's the founder of Creation Codes. And probably it's going to be a bit of a spoiler alert in regards to his purpose, but I cannot not say it right now because I absolutely love what's written on his LinkedIn profile. Alexander is on a mission to kill soulless 9 to 5 work and trace it with chalk. Boom. Mic drop. So this is a sentence I fell in love with. So I'm super excited for this conversation and very, very happy to have you here today, Alex.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, the LinkedIn taglines have morphed over the years, that's for sure. I think every creator experiences this kind of, looking from inside the jar and trying to figure out what the label on the outside is. But this one, yeah, it just hits home for me, like on many levels.
100%. It resonates with me so much. May it be true and become our reality. Let's begin with the questions. So the first question is, who are you?
Ooh, who am I? Well, my metaphysical brain immediately goes to philosophical questions, but I think that's
We
not
can
the
also
angle.
go there, by the way. People reply differently. Some people say I'm everything and I'm nothing.
Yeah, that's a very accurate description. But yeah, I know for the purposes of all cards on deck and for the purposes of what we're speaking to today, maybe it's a mixture of metaphysics and materiality or practicality. So I guess the best way to speak to that, or the best way to introduce myself, is by telling my story. And the story, as Joseph Campbell's tagline goes, that the hero wears 1,000 faces. We all share this in common across culture. So I love that as a story framework. So my hero's journey, back in the good old days of corporate sales and sales execution, I was just doing my best to actually grow and to learn and to build something and to continue expanding. Like, I'm super driven by this need for personal development and continuously striving for the horizon. I guess this is also kind of on the deck because I'm a Sagittarius and Sun, so that just comes along with the territory. But
And a Sagittarius in Sun. Okay, got it.
yeah, so
Honestly,
I'm
I checked when I was on your profile, I checked your birthday. It's December 19th, so I thought you're Capricorn, just like me. But you're just few days. Uh,
yes,
prior
Yeah,
that?
I was born 3 days before the winter solstice. So yeah, not to go too far into the astrotheology or the astrophysics. This has been kind of the main through line in everything I did and everything I've done. And there was like this common thread, common thin red line across all of my various work experience. I was never able to settle down into one job, into one role. And that has nothing to do with the landscape of the economics of, our generation, and everything to do with my inability to, well, yeah, let's call it an inability to stay settled, to continue working on the same thing, to continue repetitive processes. I would immediately get turned on by a new project or a new role or a new proposition, a new industry, and that took me from everywhere, from sales, consulting, telecommunications, IT, all the way down to the airline transportation industry. And yeah, I've never been able to sit down for more than 3 years. I think 3 years is the absolute maximum of my tenure with any particular company, any particular team, or yeah, sometimes even industry. So, it was back at that time where I couldn't really tell what was this innate drive, and the astrological explanation didn't really cut it for me. So, until one day, I said, there was this, and I'm going to share this anyways. Let's see how weird this can turn. But
Let's
the
go. I like weird.
the moment where the entire paradigm, the entire ontology of what I believe the world is, or what this, place of being or the universe is, got completely burned down, like nothing left. And that was immediately after having taken a heroic dose of mushrooms, introduced by a colleague of mine. And he was just like, after a round of beers, you want to go to my place and let's do some mushrooms? I'm like, sure, why not? The pioneering spirit. And needless to say, that everything kind of turned very weird, and yeah, I wasn't able to assemble, put the missing pieces together or reassemble my life in the way that I've been living it ever since. So all of the meaningless money making, the maximization of shareholder value, all of those things that I was never truly inspired by, or it was never my motivation factor, it was never my drive. All of those things were then, in retrospect, in the rear view mirror, like, okay, this is just not going to do it anymore. So what are you going to do now? And yeah, like immediately my insatiable curiosity and my tendency to go really deep into any rabbit hole got applied to all of the things that my previous version of myself, which was a kind of a reductionist, materialist type of logician, it got entirely torn down, and I applied all of these skills, logic, the ability to analyze, to think linearly. I applied that to the only domain that I've previously shied away from, which was everything to do with metaphysics, everything to do with personal development, with spirituality, even dare I say. And yeah, like nothing was able to satiate me after having explored that. But that kind of brought me into what I now call kind of the 7-year alchemical crucible of self-therapy, essentially. I started, posting online. I started like sharing my weirdest and most, obscene, most rebellious thoughts. Everything that came to my mind, I started sharing on my Facebook profile. And through that act of writing everything out, I learned that this is, one of the most beautiful tools to kind of have this channel for creative self-expression, for creative self-therapy, even for creative exorcism, because I honestly think it is on some level. But all of that was really in service to myself, in service to, getting the thing that is within outside into the world. And through that, kind of burning through this, what I perceive as we humans, we have so much encoded into being seen, into being perceived. All of that surfaces as soon as you start showing yourself online, uncensored, right? And I really feel that this proper inner work or purposeful soul work, especially in this day and age, dare I say, in this AI-driven world that is 2026, it requires walking through all of these polarities, right? It's kind of, how do you navigate the paradox, which is, and by the way, I love paradox, but how do you simultaneously not care, and how do you simultaneously care so much that you really become unconcerned, untroubled by external opinion, and kind of step into this greater influence and service that is the real great work, right? So all of that being said, it took me from hiding behind the big logos, behind the big corporate egregores or thought forms, into stepping into this solo creator journey, and then very rapidly finding a team, a community, a group where I felt, oh, there's others like this outside in the world. And we started collaborating. I joined forces with other collaborators, partners, and we started a startup. And all of that was, in very much stark contrast to this previous sales life. Everything was purposeful. Everything was filled with purpose and meaning, because it actually felt like we are in service to something greater than ourselves, right? And this is going to be a hot take now, because ultimately what I found out is that you can actually burn out much quicker if you're doing purposeful work.
Yeah, I heard a lot from creators.
And who would have thought it, that kind of first principles, the basics apply regardless of what type of work you do, which is keeping your mind, keeping your mental, your emotional, your spiritual, and your physical self in a condition, in coherence, so that you can actually do the work that is required, not the other way around. So, after having gone through that, period of essentially burning out like a bright supernova, trying to do everything, I figured out that, I'm carrying actually everything, all of the undercurrents, all of the subliminal or subconscious kind of programs, everything was still there, despite of me not being, within the open space floor plan, without not being, in an office setting, in a 9-to-5 setting. This carries over. It has a passport. It travels with you.
Yeah, it travels, yeah.
So, then I went for another round of, okay, how do I pace myself? How do I find time to rest and really, step away from everything and start building my life and my business intentionally, so that it serves my lifestyle, so that it serves me, so that I'm able to show up and serve those that I choose to serve, right? That's kind of the hero's journey arc. And now, because I have gone through all of this, I still remember the days where social media was not a thing. You could build businesses using a telephone, or
Yeah, cold calling. Hi.
So I know that that's possible. I also know it's possible to build extremely profitable businesses, even if you're not doing work on purpose. And I know it is extremely challenging for people to be at this threshold of, going from this type of work to meaningful work, and doing it in a way that actually is grounding and rewards your central nervous system. You're not overextended, you're not panicking, and like everything kind of boils down to the individual, the operator, right? So this is, what sets me up for, or what set me up for the kind of work that I started doing within Creation Codes, at the back end of this kind of dark night of the ego, dark night of the soul, and this perfect, blowout, perfect burnout, at the end of 2023. So here we are. I'm feeling pretty cool.
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing your hero's journey. I love the structure you've chosen, and you took us on a ride. Coming back to mushrooms.
Okay.
What did you see there? What did you see there that shifted and that like removed all the veil of life?
Yes. So, first, let me put a disclaimer here because at some point during this experience or after this experience, for some years, I genuinely believe that everybody needs to have this type of non ordinary state of consciousness, right? That probably everybody would benefit from doing what we call plant medicine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that necessarily today. So, just
Mm-hmm.
putting that out there. And I
What
found
shifted though? Like as you mentioned it, what shifted though?
right. So what shifted is I've gone through a lot of different communities, spiritual communities, healing, personal development spaces, the wellness spaces, and seen a very common thread, not only in myself, but in other people as well, which is that this, even though that it is such a beautiful experience that actually lifts the veil of seeing yourself not as a skin encapsulated ego, as Alan Watts calls it perfectly, but rather a part of the entire cosmos, an inseparable part of the entire cosmos. But there's this duality, there's this inherent duality, whereby this type of experience all of a sudden flushes your organism, flushes your psyche, and all you want to do is go back. And that creates a very insidious cycle of continuously healing and healing and healing, going from, one ceremony to another ceremony, and never actually putting what was revealed into and integrating it into your everyday normal life, so to speak, into your everyday, consciousness. So that's why I've noticed that, probably this is not the best, or it's not necessarily a thing that everybody needs to experience, especially because I've seen a lot of, very, very dark horror stories where if an individual is not
Ready?
emotionally and mentally as stable, as grounded, it can get pretty etheric, pretty disconnected from the physical plane of reality, and it's definitely something that can shake the organism. It can shake the system to an extent where you start doubting whether the net positive outcome is actually there, or whether the individual has landed somewhere that's even worse, a state that is even worse than it was before. So that's kind of the long-winded way of saying what's changed my mind around that. But that's all. There's also another layer. Another layer is that I found that all of these beautiful experiences are actually available to the human being without the external helpers, without the plant
Mm-hmm.
medicine.
Mm-hmm.
All of this is available through different modalities, through different methods such as breath work, sweat lodges, ceremonial sweat lodges, using Jungian active imagination. All of these things are essentially communication highways with your unconscious self, with your psyche, that is very plentiful and actually cannot wait to give you all of the metaphors, all of the symbols, and all of the clues so that you can live your life based on what your truest vocation is, using that word very
Mm-hmm.
intentionally. Vocation meaning what you are feeling called to actually do with this lifetime. So yeah, that's kind of the long answer to that question.
Mm-hmm. And we parked another question in regards to your personal experience. Like, what was
Mushrooms, yes.
there? Yeah, what was there that shaped your world?
Right. So I think I mentioned that, I grew up in a secular world. I grew up in a secular family where, this scientific kind of worldview of the materialist reductionist operating system, or the philosophy of Descartes, or the Cartesian operating system, as it's called technically, that's the
Mm-hmm.
technical term, whereby I think, therefore I am, right? Which is,
Hmm.
it's one of the biggest philosophical miscalculations. Sorry, Mister. But
He's turning in his
that,
grave now.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think, if he would have the ability to return to life, he would see the error. But even though this error was a beautiful error in larger contexts, meaning that our civilization was able to achieve wonders and technological breakthroughs. We were able to conquer nature by measure and number, essentially, which is what Descartes was revealed after having been a mercenary in an army that was sieging Prague just before the start of the 30-year war, which is the 30-year war, which kind of lay waste to the previous European dominant system of monarchies and gave rise to the modern, scientific revolution and the modern republic. But a lot of the scientific community fails to notice that it is very clearly documented, black on white, that this came to him through a dream. It was given to him by an angel. So, all right.
I didn't know that.
give, give me one miracle and I will explain everything else, right? Mm, right. So, um, yeah, that was a little bit of a tangent, but that was the worldview. That was the operating system, right? Very kind of objective, very logical, very rational, very reductionist in a way, and even more so nihilistic, meaning there's no meaning, right? Just have fun. All of the trappings
Hmm.
of the modern culture. That was my starting point. And what was revealed during that experience is actually the interconnected web of everything. So, after having been exposed to that, it was like, oh, okay. Looks like we're
Like you
not
were
in
able to
Kansas
know it,
anymore.
or you felt it, or like how was your sensual experience? Or it was more just kind of like a feeling, an aha moment.
Hmm. No, so, every experience, every non-ordinary states of and every non-ordinary state of consciousness is kind of unique to the individual. But I
Hmm.
guess the common thread and what I also experienced was this boundary dissolution, right? I no longer felt this was like an inner knowing, an experiential knowing, versus
Yeah.
the knowing by transmission or knowing by reading a medium, knowing by
Yeah,
because somebody
theory.
wrote it on
Hmm.
LinkedIn. It is an inner knowing because you have that felt experience, and then all the rest just kind of does. It's not it's not grounded in anything. It's just a transmission through another medium. So yeah, that was kind of that was the experience of it. And I had after that first experience, I had many more similar experiences, including using the modalities that I mentioned earlier, which made this a very permanent state that is very reachable at any given point in time. But it also took me some time to really start integrating all of that into my life and building a life in alignment with all of that knowing, where what I think about, what I feel, what I experience is also what gets, essentially acted upon, what is then experienced through action. And I believe that coherence is kind of what we're all looking for in terms of, the good life or the human experience, if you will.
Hmm. And with all of these experiences, because as per my understanding, you were helping yourself integrate all of these things. What would you recommend people, for example, who want to experiment with all of those modalities, um, find someone who can help them integrate or trust that I know how to integrate it myself? Because I also heard several stories about ayahuasca, and a lot of people just go have these plant medicines with shamans, and there is absolutely no integration, no work with a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And it messes with their mind. It's kind of like they went there with questions, they came back with even more questions, and like in a place where they find themselves in a place where they feel even more confused. So what I heard, again, I haven't experienced it ever in my life, but what I heard in case, because I was drawn to do it, I was recommended to find a place where there's a specialist, a therapist who could, after that experience, could help me integrate whatever has happened during the intake of Aya.
Right, right. Yeah, so speaking about ayahuasca in general, I think one of the most important criteria that I would kind of make this decision upon if I would be in a place where I would be looking for some external support with that is finding a trustworthy guide. And I cannot emphasize this enough. A trustworthy guide means somebody who's actually been sitting with the medicine for years, if not decades. Somebody who's either a native coming from, some of the still alive traditions or cultural traditions, such as the Shipibo tribes deep in the Amazon, or even Westerners who have been involved with the work and have been able to support other wisdom keepers in facilitating the experiences for others and helping them integrate all of that. So I think that's really the only or the single most important question that I would have is this a safe, trustworthy container. I know we've seen in the past decade or so, especially when this plant medicine world kind of exploded, and we started having even VC funded ventures in the space of psychedelic medicine, and all of this has shifted into a very commercialized kind of thing. So yeah, like finding an individual guide with integrity who you can trust I think that's the single most important thing. Because speaking also about what we were saying earlier about the Cartesian operating system and this new white lab coat type of clergy, it oftentimes looks at a thing objectively, right? It's almost like this is a scientific objective experiment, and we're measuring. But what this fails to kind of take into consideration is that the observer, the experimenter, brings all of their energetics, all of their emotions, all of their emotional, mental baggage with them into the experience itself. So, this is, I think, why it's important to know that if you are searching for a guide, you should be able to trust that they know how to and have the experience and know how to guide others through whatever they are working through. Yeah.
So that's specifically for ayahuasca. And what about the other experiences, like what you mentioned, breath work and all the other modalities? Would the same recommendation apply?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a universal principle to adhere to. It's just that, if you're considering ayahuasca or bufo or anything of that ilk, it's even more paramount to have that consideration. But yeah, this applies not only to the ceremonial, ritual, plant medicine work. I would dare to say it even applies to coaching, business guides, business coaches, mentors, consultants, everybody, right? The question is always, how integrated is this individual with that experience? Do they actually have that experience and the ability to facilitate whatever the transformation is, right? Yeah.
And you've also mentioned your burnout experience. Was it during your first venture as a founder, Up for All? Is it this space where you burnt out,
No,
or
no,
it
it was
was
actually,
Astraya?
yeah, that was within Asraya, the startup,
Astraya.
that, yeah,
What are your tips
yeah.
for people not to burn out as founders?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not entirely sure I can give a very straightforward answer to that. And I'll tell you why. You said as you were opening this interview, this conversation, you said something along the lines of, hopefully you can learn from our mistakes, right?
Yes. But I know some people need to make those mistakes to learn.
I'm definitely one of those people. I need to make my own
Mm,
mistakes, right? I don't think that the experience or the lecture, it doesn't really land unless I make that mistake myself.
yeah.
And I know that this goes a little bit contradictory even to what I do, but as I said, I love paradox. I think what I do essentially, helping others, coaching others, consulting others, guiding others through building purposeful work or purposeful kind of, lifestyle businesses. I like to call myself a business chiropractor. I think that's the
Mm,
best kind of analogy for that, because in order for us to be actually in the optimal coherent space of operating a business and living our life, because those two things are not obviously disjointed, we have to be in alignment with ourselves, with our core calling, with our natural zones of genius, with our strengths as well as our shadows. But yeah, ultimately, maybe working with a coach, working with the right guide can help you collapse the time that is required for you to get
hmm.
from point A to point B. It can definitely accelerate the thing, but I think it's inevitable that you have to make that mistake yourself, ultimately. Um,
Hmm.
Maybe you don't need to repeat all of the mistakes, or you don't need to let the mistakes escalate, elevate to the level that is, super detrimental. Maybe you can avoid yourself a little bit of pain and suffering,
Hmm.
but I don't think it's entirely avoidable. I think that's baked into the human experience. So,
What is helping you right now? Because you made that mistake. You burned out. You learn from it. And now you know, like, what is different from Alex now and Alex before?
right. Yeah. So the very clear difference is that I know how to set boundaries and respect those boundaries.
Okay.
And that is important because having had that experience of actually burning out, of not feeling like I can even, get up in the morning, of having been, bedridden or couch ridden for nearly 2 months,
Hmm.
the only thing that I actually desired or that I actually wanted, that actually mattered to me was being healthy, right?
Yeah.
It is only when we're not healthy that all of the other things kind of collapse. Nothing really matters. There's no burning priority. Everything
That is the
fades into,
foundation.
yeah, everything fades into the background. So unless you've had a very painful experience, it's almost like a mental note, right? It is a reminder there that you know what happens if you go along that path. You know exactly where it leads. So yeah, now in retrospect, I can say, okay, I'm not doing this because I know where it leads. Very simply. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Totally. Totally makes sense. Um,
And
do you remember? Yeah.
yeah, no, I thought maybe we can go even a little deeper in terms of, how this in practice looks like. So, at that point in time, I felt like, okay, the stakes are high. This is like purposeful work. We set ourselves on a grand mission, and in order to achieve that mission, we need to work hard and work really hard. And I felt like, okay, I have to work really hard and show up and be available and try to be everywhere and try to help as much as I can, which even got me out of my natural zone of genius, doing things that I've not done before, and actually there's kind of a sweet spot between being at the edge of one's competence, and there is a point where being so outside of one's competence, it is actually detrimental to your inner state, your inner peace, your inner coherence, and things kind of go
Hmm.
sideways, or
Like
you
the
know,
nervous system
um,
has an overload.
yeah. So today I just don't show up on Zoom calls and lead sessions at 1 a.m. in the morning. Um,
No. Hmm.
That's one example. Or I don't feel like I need to be involved with every particular workflow or with every particular problem that we're solving, and know myself to the extent that I know where I am best of service and where I actually have the best or the optimal value to deliver. So
And what are your
I
limits also?
yeah, I mean, as I said, I thrive on the edge and on the horizon, so I love the challenge of continuously learning. But there's obviously ways how you can overload your system where that kind of backfires. But yeah, my zones of genius are really in storytelling and communication and, painting a very clear vision and breaking down very abstract concepts into like very clear actionable steps. And yeah, that kind of helps me, be the kind of the central point for holding space for others so that they can find out who they really are, underneath it
Mm-hmm.
all, stripping away all of the layers of, external performance, external validation seeking, lack of self-worth, all of these things that I've struggled with before, right? And I think truly that's why I say, and why I continue saying that without having felt pain and struggling and suffering, you do not really have the experience to be able to hold space for others to process whatever that they're going through, right? So it's almost like saying pain and suffering deepens our capacity and compassion. But there is a point where we have to let go of that suffering and pain. It just doesn't
Yeah,
make sense to carry it with us further. I think that's Ram Dass. Yeah. Um,
it definitely helps us relate to the stories of people. I mean, for me personally, it's so much easier to work with clients who, and for some magical reason, most of them have similar pains that I had before, that the old version of me had. So I could definitely relate what they feel, how they think, what they're going through. And again, it's so much easier to help these people when you've been through that pain.
exactly.
I'm wondering when you moved, do you remember that day, what you felt, what was happening around you when you shifted, when you quit your corporate and you went into your own business? Like, how was it excitement? Was it fear? Uh, what was that day or
Hmm.
period, if you remember?
I do. I remember it very clearly. But it was, like a lot of the advice on the internet and advice on LinkedIn in particular is centered around, yeah, just burn the bridges, go all in, right? I mean, there's some merit to that type of mode or that kind of behavior, but it's not something I recommend.
Mm.
It's not
So you
something I
wouldn't
recommend.
recommend people to, like, if they're working in a 9 to 5, to straight away quit and start something new.
It depends on the situation, right?
Okay.
In most cases, I would say no. In most cases, I would say, you know what? Your ability to show up with confidence and not be dependent on signing up the next client and paying the bills and paying rent to keep a roof over your head. If all of those things are present, then you are actually diminishing your capacity to be of service and to sign a project, sign a client, and do the work that you are here to do. So, there needs to be some like practicality, there needs to be some groundedness, there needs to be some regulation, like internal regulation, in terms of, okay, I have the resources, I have the capacity, and I feel, empowered, I feel resourced in order to be able to do the best work that I'm able to do. And that definitely doesn't come from, financial stress and from feeling like you're having to put fires all over the place and, jumping from one call another to another call and, even jumping on calls and figuring out if you can help clients that are probably not your ideal clients. And I preach around the autonomies, and I say, people need to live in autonomy in terms of calendar. So calendar autonomy, meaning that we have full control over how we spend our time. Income autonomy, meaning we get to be autonomous in terms of what we're saying yes to and what we're saying no to, and have a range of revenue or range of incomes so that we do not depend on any particular project, on any particular client, or any particular stream of income. I also talk about work autonomy, meaning that we get to choose precisely which types of projects we want to work on, because it does absolutely have a compounding effect. Saying yes to projects that are outside of the North Star or the goal that we want to achieve have a larger invisible cost. And yeah, probably the most important is the energy autonomy, meaning that we know ourselves so thoroughly that we know what fills our cup, what brings us joy, what type of work we actually enjoy, and how much rest and when we need it, so that when we show up, we show up energized. We show up with our cup overflowing rather than depleted, rather than trying.
Give from the space of abundance,
Yeah,
your own
essentially.
abundance. Mm-hmm. So what about that day where you shifted
Oh,
from
right. Yeah, that was just context setting. Yeah. Um, yeah, so for me, I started planning my exit and building that bridge probably a year before I actually quit my previous job. So
Mhm.
that meant that I was very intentional with what I'm building, taking smaller steps, you know, dividing my time between keeping the light burning inside of the role that I was in, the contract, and then allocating the rest of my energy creatively towards building that bridgeway. So I was in a great position where, despite of the very unprecedented downturn in terms of economies, especially in the airline industry, if you can imagine, after the whole 2020 episode,
Mhm.
I was able to outperform myself and really, kind of, yeah, just create everything across the KPIs that I've agreed with my managers. So that gave me a lot of flexibility in terms of, uh, you know, taking it very slowly, being in a position where I have sufficient savings, where I've even
Mhm.
already sold my program that I was giving birth to at that point in time, and then submitting my resignation letter to then my VP Sales of Europe, which was, I think, December 30th, 2020, 2021.
Wow.
Yeah.
New year, new me. How did that feel?
Yeah, it was a mixed bag of excitement, this kind of exploration or exploratory archetypal vibe, the Sagittarius, kind of the new horizons, the absolute enthusiasm about the freedom of not, having to keep up appearances or not having to perform for a job, for a role that I didn't really feel was meaningful, even though, still keeping kind of myself in a place of gratitude for that particular job, because it was
Mhm.
one of the ways in which I was able to, in a very resourceful kind of way, build that bridge. So yeah, but there was obviously also fear, fear of, ooh, am I really going to be up to this, right? It's kind of scary going out on one's
Into
own
the
and
unknown.
venturing into the unknown, especially when it comes to income or money or the financial side of things. And I think this is really why a lot of us get stuck in a way where, one of our most primal kind of reptilian brain red flags, get waved around because it's an existential threat potentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why all of the wounding around self-worth, all of these wounds flare up. All of the wounds around visibility, around being seen as ridiculous, being seen as something of a fool, because you're doing exactly the opposite of what society had told you is the only sensible thing to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, it is precisely by following that courageous impulse that you then get the opportunity to process all of those emotions, right? And I think I oftentimes joke about entrepreneurship being one of the best or one of the most powerful spiritual practices or spiritual integration practices,
Sure. Oh my God.
because everything flies out the window. You have absolutely no one to blame for anything that is going on inside your business other than yourself, whilst also keeping, some level of sanity and grace with yourself and not being too hard on
Mm-hmm.
yourself, and keeping yourself in check and in balance in that way. So yeah.
Did you straight away know what you want to do when when that uh, shift happened?
um I had a very clear vision of what I felt is where we as a society need to move. And I'm just wired this way, right? I need like a very clear North Star, a very clear vision, as well as a very clear anti vision, or, the ninth circle of hell, according to Dante, in order to have that sense of, okay, this is where we're moving, this is what is kind of currently being asked of us, and, speak about mythic burdens of epic proportions. But that's just how I move in the world. And I don't necessarily think that everybody needs to have that kind of a strong sense of mission. Although I absolutely feel that that type of mission and that type of vision is kind of the necessary ingredient or a necessary nutrient in order to build something on purpose. Because we are speaking about purpose, right? So purposeful work is work that you derive meaning from. So if you're not working towards the thing that you find meaningful, towards your, kind of larger overarching vision and in alignment with your values, then it's not going to feel like purposeful work. It's not going to feel meaningful.
And if you were to put in one sentence, what is your purpose?
Hmm. Yeah. So, huh, with the utmost economy, how can I express this? There's a differentiation, there's a difference between a mission and purpose, right? Um, a mission is something that you can very clearly state, which is exactly the kind of the tagline that you shared from my LinkedIn profile. But it does in some way tie into purpose, right? Being on purpose and finding your own purpose, I think this is it's a Pandora's box, and it's a black box, and I think a lot of people get stuck trying to find purpose. It's almost like you need a torchlight and you're looking outside of yourself, like, where's my purpose? Where's my purpose? I don't think that that's how you find your purpose. I don't think purpose is intentionally something that you can find, but it is something that you build. It is something that is gradually over time revealed as long as you keep walking towards the path, walking towards that kind of overarching vision, that North Star, that you don't necessarily even know how to explain, but it is like a visceral
Feeling.
impulse. It is a visceral kind of intuition. And I think that's kind of our internal compass that gives us this ability to make decisions and discern what, the next step is going to look like. And eventually, over time, with micro experiments and with little baby steps, you can start filling in the little puzzle pieces so that you can then say with conviction that for me, I find that for me, purpose is being able to live in accordance to myself, meaning that I'm in pursuit of autonomy, freedom, and devoted towards self mastery in everything that I do, right? That is kind of my purpose.
Hmm. Nice.
I, and it may sound a little fluffy, it may sound a little woo, but I think this is really the most distilled version that I can give you in terms of how I view it, how I experience that, and how I see this unfold. Because it is kind of it's a mental shortcut that makes you it gives you a very clear compass and a map to say, okay, um, all of the opportunities that are plentiful abound. Um, in any direction that you had, it's going to take you towards a particular destination. So you better be very clear what direction you're heading in, because that is going to tell you exactly what your life is going to look like a few months, a few years, or a decade down the road.
Imagine a world where everyone is actually living, following that purpose, being in alignment with their values, with their needs, with who they are. That would be a beautiful world.
Yeah, I've imagined that world quite frequently.
Mm. I love also, by the way, I think it was in your Substack that you do speak to a person, but also you share with your content, with how you write. You also share like a bigger vision. Like I not only want to help you one on one, I'm freaking want to change the whole world. I want the whole world to be in that space. This is big. This is really, really cool. That your vision is not as narrow, but it's like so wide. It concerns everyone. Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
And
thank you
we've
for
also,
picking that up. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's inevitable. It also gets me into trouble with, and I'm kind of kidding when I say this, but gets me into trouble by, almost like giving the appearance that I'm taking on too tall of an order, or, that there's this kind of idealist, utopic, kind of beatific vision that is absolutely not achievable. Um, but I think this is absolutely critical for, especially for our time right now, which to me feels like a crisis of meaning. It feels like more and more individuals, not only in the workspace, but in the collective, are going to start asking themselves this question, especially because we find ourselves currently in a technological development where a lot of the work is going to be changed beyond recognition, right? So, knowing that in our kind of Western culture, in our globalist culture, most individuals identify with their titles, their work. So, what happens when you strip that away? What
Yeah.
happens is a meaning crisis. And, I'm sure, I bet you've experienced this in your work. I've definitely experienced this in my work, and I see this only going to get even stronger and stronger. I may be biased, but, because I surrounded myself in this type of viewpoint and
Hmm.
with this kind of group of individuals who are thinking about those things. But I definitely do sense that this is one of the major turning points that is coming. So being able to ask yourself the bigger questions of, so now what?
Yeah. Meaning. Look for meaning, find that meaning, and ask the questions. I mean, that's also one of the reasons why am I asking people these questions, like, who are you? What is your
Right.
purpose? Like something, again, I'm asking already those people who are on that path or living already purposefully, but also these are the questions that people who are listening to us, watching us could contemplate on. Just literally sit and contemplate on
Right.
those questions.
Right. And also for it not to be so, esoterically sounding, I love history. I think history is one of our biggest teachers, or it's the mother of teaching. And if we look back into history, we'll see that we find ourselves in a precipice of time that is not unprecedented, right? We've all seen this many times before if we study history closely. And one of the previous times where something like this happened on the collective level was before the Renaissance, where the empire started crumbling, where people were no longer feeling like the actual cultural stream of, whatever the counterpart of this kind of technological utopia that we've been living in accordance to for the past couple of decades. It no longer feels true. It feels like it's lost steam, it's lost wind in its sails, and people are essentially disappointed and disillusioned by it because it did not deliver on the promise. And, it's not the first time in history that something like this happened. And usually people started, if we look back in history, they started reaching for the last time things made sense, right? So looking further back into history than ever, you can see that a lot of our, ancient roots and origins already have answers to most of the questions that we as modern humans are asking ourselves in this present day and in this present moment. So it's not like you have to reinvent the wheel. And then if you look at the age of the Renaissance, which is a very, kind of bubbly term that kind of applies to a lot of the world, but it doesn't, and it's kind of synchronous or simultaneous, but it's also not. But the Italian Renaissance, for example, if you look at that period in time, it was an absolute economic boom, a philosophical expansion, a kind of a reenactment or a re-engagement, or, the actual word Renaissance means going back into a state of nascence meaning origin point, right? It is the beginning, so to speak. So what this means, how I interpret this is, nascence versus ignorance. Ignorance means, you something willfully ignore, whereby nascence means you keep an open mind so that you apply curiosity to whatever it is that you are endeavoring to do. And you will see that a lot of this progress, a lot of this development, cultural, development in terms of art, architecture, all of this really came down to people coming into their kind of sense of purpose, where a beatific vision was portrayed to the extent that it motivated and moved people. It was speaking to them on a subconscious level and using emotion. It was kind of channeling this artistic energy. And I think this is exactly what is needed right now, right? I think that the poets, the artists, the visionaries, if they cannot paint a very clear picture, that's when society comes into trouble, right? I love this. I absolutely love this film. What is it called? That Poets Society. Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, it's on my to watch list. I haven't watched it yet.
Oh, yes, I think you would love it. There's this very
Mhm.
powerful line by Robin Williams that goes along the lines of, and I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit, but engineering, law, architecture, medicine, all of these are respectable kind of roles, respectable jobs, and we absolutely need them in order to have all of the furnishings of a modern day civilization and society with all of the infrastructure, with everything in place. But it's actually the poets, the artists, the visionaries that make us feel alive. And without that, we get lost without that, right? It's those things is what make life worth living. The other aspect is absolutely important, but it's actually just infrastructure to allow the good life.
Yeah, that art, poetry, yeah, art in general is something that touches the soul, right?
Right. And we don't even necessarily have to think about art. I definitely do not think about art in rigid terms, only as, painting or writing or poetry or performative arts or singing. I think art is really a sense of living in accordance to one's tune, singing out the song that is within you, meaning that we, as human beings, when we are in coherence with ourselves, our life is art. And that is why I oftentimes speak to, almost like a sort of an archetype. And this is probably another rabbit hole we could go into. I absolutely love Jungian psychology and archetypal psychology. But I oftentimes speak to the artist entrepreneur because it is both a science as well as an art. Because the artistic part is what makes this, worthy and meaningful and aligned and soulful and a living, breathing endeavor. And the the entrepreneurial side is almost like a scaffolding. It's, the very necessary scientific backbone or structure that enables you to expand your vision and to endeavor in your artistic self-expression. And the entrepreneurial part also speaks to, well, okay, if art, and this is something I do with my clients. I essentially break this down into three kind of stages of the journey where know thyself is the first step, right? And this is the most critical step that not Harvard's and not any other Ivy League school will teach. Um, the other component is knowing thy client, and that part is, the thing that you actually learn inside of business schools, and especially in building businesses and being at the front line of building a business, and knowing who exactly it is that you serve, knowing their intentions, their struggles, their, what keeps them up at night at 2 a.m. What are the things that they actually desire? What do they aspire to? And what are the pains and struggles that they're working through? And if you know that intimately, you have, decided to put yourself in a place of service to somebody else. And then the third component is essentially building a bridge between your kind of individualistic inner work, artistic self-expression towards being of actual service to something greater than yourself, whatever that may be. And it doesn't need to be as, as I said earlier, like big visions can have multiple implications in terms of a very, very heavy burden to carry. So we need to be mindful of that. And probably not all mythic burdens need to be carried by the individual, especially in this, hyper individualistic kind of culture set or cultural petri dish that we find ourselves in, where, all of a sudden you have to be this, continuously do shadow work, show up for yoga, be of service to your community, continuously improve yourself and, do personal development and build a majestic business and be, something of value to community at large. And that's a lot to carry by an individual.
It is. And when you spoke several times, I had the word bridge because you mentioned also right now you use the word bridge. Several times through the conversation, I had this word popping up in my mind. And yeah, how I perceive you with this through this conversation right now is literally like a bridge between so many things, between logic and woo things, between artistic and entrepreneurial parts. And yeah, this is really really beautiful. I learned so much today. Thank you so much, really, for sharing so precisely with so much details, your journey, your path, your thoughts. And let's go into our last part of our life, which is the card session. We're gonna
Alrighty.
play some cards. Okay, card number one. Let's see what comes up. Are you usually early on time or late to events? Explain.
Uh, Usually, okay, I'll take the average. I'm usually right on time for events, and there's no real deeper explanation. I don't think that you need to be fashionably late in order to attract attention or, come into a space or an event venue when at a precise point in time where the energy is already kind of lively and everything is unfolding, or be early in the, kind of getting through early conversations and having the intimacy usually that is not afforded to you by an overcrowded space. So yeah, and I wouldn't search for any deeper meaning in this particular explanation, if that makes sense. Just to throw a little bit of a paradox into otherwise a very meaningful conversation. But yeah, I also think, there's a difference between coming to events that you're in some way involved in facilitating or organizing,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
events that are being, facilitated or organized by other people and that you are invited to. So there's that distinction as well. But yeah, in general, I just like to be respectful of everyone's time, right? So that's kind of my thought around that. Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, card number two. If you have, when was the moment you realized you weren't invincible?
Phew.
Yeah, wow. That's a good one.
That's a very synchronous one for our conversation. I
Mm.
definitely realized I wasn't invincible, during my burnout experience, having been kind of bedridden and stuck at the couch with two little children and the entire family, all four of us being, ill for a very, very long time. Yeah. So that's, yeah, that invincibility, I think it can be like kryptonite to Superman. It's almost like it's good to feel conviction and, you know, move in the world with courage and almost have this sense of invincibility. And, how I interpret that is, well, if you know that your soul is immortal, which I absolutely believe is true, especially based on my experiences thus far, you kind of get this sense of invincibility. But then on the other side, there's, this duality at play where your physical vehicle, your body, is not invincible. It can break down. It can get tired. It can, fail to deliver whatever it is that you're wishing or wanting to experience. And being able to navigate that paradox, I think that's the learning point there. I don't think a sense of invincibility is necessarily bad, but it does come with its shadow. So yeah, and I've not only felt not invincible once in life. I've felt that many times, but I've also felt invincible many times. So
So the idea here is to kind of find a space between them, not to go into the complete duality of invincibility or invincibility.
yeah, I think it's very helpful to um, kind of understand life or comprehend life as this inevitable paradox, and that you are in a process of circling the square or squaring the circle. You're in a place of having to understand that everything is, a polarity, but that polarity doesn't necessarily mean that there's two different things. And I love to borrow from science in particular about explaining this, because if we talk about heat or cold, it feels like these are two different things, different
Yeah.
concepts, or in contrast to each other. But that couldn't be further from the truth. There is a source of heat, and there is a lack of source of heat. There is the
Mm-hmm.
sun, and the further you move away, or if you hide into the shadow, you feel cold. But there's no source of cold. There's just a source of heat and a lack of thereof. So on the
Yeah.
spectrum of super hot and super cold, those are actually the same things. They're on the same pole. And this applies to pretty much every experience, right? There is no source of darkness. There is a source of light, and there
Yeah.
is an
Light
absence
or
of
no
light.
light. Mm.
Yeah.
I love this perspective. Okay, card number 3. Okay, what would you recommend? Which book would you recommend for our listeners?
Whew. Well, that's a very general question that's very hard for me to answer unless I know
Based on our
something more.
conversation, maybe something related to purpose.
Right. Hmm. Let me think about this. I'm thinking of all of the most obvious examples. But yeah, I wanna give a recommendation that is actually not probably on the uh, New York New York Times bestseller list.
Bestseller.
Okay, I'll give this example. One of my favorite authors is Robert Anton Wilson,
Hmm.
and he has a lot of books that he had written, but maybe the most relevant would be Prometheus Rising.
Hmm. I'm curious. I just Googled the book.
Hmm.
Oh, I'm curious, why is that? What did click for you in this book? Or that's gonna be a spoiler for people
No,
who
it's
didn't read
it's
it.
not going to be a spoiler. Maybe I can explain how my train of thought went in terms of
Mm-hmm.
recommending this. I feel like purpose and meaning is mostly derived from a sense of creativity. I actually feel that the act of creation or the creative act is what is to being a human being as what is an apple is to an apple tree. Meaning that ultimately, if we really boil everything down, if we strip it down to its essence, we as human beings are always creating something. At the very minimum, we're creating our subjective experience of life or our own personal reality tunnel, if you will. And I feel that a sense of completion, a sense of contentment, and a sense of fulfillment, meaning, and purpose is derived from that very sense of creation, the act of creation. And then, if I want to break down the definition of what is creativity, creativity is the ability to connect the dots with seemingly disconnected or um, separate subjects or domains, right? And then if somebody would ask me, well, okay, why wouldn't I then read, Stephen Pressfield's work, which is, it's absolutely brilliant and I love it. I love Stephen Pressfield's work. but or the any other like creator, and there are many I could list, but to encourage the state of a creative mind, um, why not try to read something that is actually completely outside of the domain that you are, finding yourself in? So if we're talking about purposeful work, and if we're talking about entrepreneurship and building a purpose-filled, driven business vehicle, our mind would immediately go to precisely searching those search terms on Amazon or wherever that may be. But I find that connecting the dots between, things that are completely, at first appearance, unrelated, that's actually where some of the magic lies. So, Robert Anton Wilson is absolutely a wordsmith, a storyteller, a magician, and somebody who had created, or should I say, authored a life for himself and for his family, using also his, corporate kind of lifestyle and escaping that lifestyle and becoming a full-time author. And through this particular work, which is Prometheus Rising, he borrows obviously from Greek mythology and speaks about the Promethean, fire bringing or Luciferian kind of archetypal vision, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is the kind of the spark that brings, this creative unfolding into the human being, into the human vessel. So I think it's absolutely brilliant in how it reshapes and redefines our perception on reality itself and how we operate within that. So no spoilers there, and I think,
Yeah.
yeah, that context then also explains or illuminates a little bit in terms of how I like to think about these things and why I chose this book in particular.
Well, that will go on my to read to read list too. Well, we'll be wrapping up right now. Thank you so much, Alex, for joining All Cards on Deck, and thank you everyone also listening, watching us live or watching us as a recording. One more question before we close. What is the best way for people to reach you? And are there any additional links you'd like to share? I'll definitely put them all on LinkedIn and YouTube also, because I'm going to post
Sure,
it on YouTube.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I am, out of all of the social media platforms, I'm probably most active on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
And given that we are live on LinkedIn, that just makes sense. I do also keep, as you mentioned earlier, an appearance on Substack where I go a little deeper into everything. And even people subscribing to my Substack, they get a kind of a welcome package, where I deep dive into my story and what we shared today and go even more into the nuances. And yeah, um, there's also another thing, if you don't mind me plugging that in. Um, there's a free tool that I built, that I've now been running for about a month or so, and people have been raving with glorious feedback that it's been very helpful. And it ties into particularly what we were speaking about before, where I said that knowing thyself, knowing yourself with such intimacy that you know how to move into the, bridging that gap between yourself and others, the people that you serve, your clients, your customers, and building a business. So I created, through the help of a lot of the deep dives and the study of archetypal psychology, Jungian psychology, and alchemical kind of occult knowledge. I've baked that into a self-assessment test that provides a report at the end of that. So anybody feeling pulled to, you know, get potentially something of an insight about which archetypes are most alive in themselves, yeah, I'm happy to share that.
Yeah, awesome. I
And
have all
the
those
link,
links from your profile. So it's the archetype, archetype.
architecture XYZ, yeah, that's the one.
Yes. Yeah, yes, archetype, architecture, XYZ, then LinkedIn and Substack. Everything is there on your LinkedIn, but I'm gonna also post it on this live and YouTube. Anything else?
Beautiful. Yeah, I feel like Alice in Wonderland on Instagram. I've intended to, show a little bit more of myself, which is not so much written form, but more visual. And I
Mm-hmm.
definitely feel like a sore thumb sticking out there, but I am kind of semi-present there as well if anybody wants to
Yeah,
connect
let's have
on
that too.
Instagram. Yeah.
Cool.
Um,
Awesome. Once again, thank you so much. I'll share all the details for you guys to connect with Alex in the description on YouTube, LinkedIn comments, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.
Thank you, Ola. Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.